supposed to be here, but last minute change of plans, he's not going to be here. Let me quickly tell you what we are doing. 30 minutes, I hope I can finish everything. We are going to talk about a many-to-one matching problem with distributional constraints. And there are many applications of that, and many important applications. For many important applications, stability is not a policy requirement at all. But when you look at those papers, researchers usually impose stability, and they usually start like this. They take a problem, an application with distributional objectives. They assume a choice function, and presumably a substitutable one, impose stability, and they come up with the standard solutions. And we are going to claim that this approach actually has its own shortcomings, and it may lead to misleading conclusions. In particular, distributional objectives are not necessarily compatible with the main policy objectives. And when you just assume stability, you bury the problem one more layer deeper. And that's what we are going to do instead. We are going to begin with the policy requirements first. We are going to formulate them as axioms. And of course, we are not the first one to do that. There's a long tradition of axiomatic characterization in the literature without even imposing stability. And we are going to characterize a deferred acceptance algorithm with a particular choice function. Of course, our outcome, our solution, is going to be stable with respect to that particular choice function. But eventually, we are not going to be able to meet all of our policy requirements. We are going to try to optimize on that one. That's where we are going to differ from the rest of the literature. In the rest of the literature, when even the recent ones, they state blocking conditions as axioms, and when they eliminate those blocking conditions, they end up with the stability condition again. It is not really, in that regard, our work is going to be quite different than what has been done in the literature. Let me give you a simple example. Think of this as a school choice example. There are three applicants: a low-income student, another low-income student, and a high-income student. And there's one school. There's a baseline priority. L1 has the highest priority, then H, then L2. And school one, the school wants to reserve one seat for low-income, for a low-income student. What does this mean? Reserving a seat, right? That is how it is usually done. We divide the school into two sub-schools. One for low-income students, where they are going to be favored. And this school is going to have only one seat reserved for low-income students, and an open seat. This is also open. Every seat in the reserved seat is also open, as long as there's no low-income student who claims that. A high-income student can get it, right? And after that, the low-income sub-school is going to elevate the priority of low-income students without changing the baseline priority among them. So all low-income students are going to be ranked higher than high-income. The relative ranking is not going to change. And the open seat is going to keep the baseline priority. Then the literature usually studies various types of choice rules. One of them is applicants first apply to the open seat. In this case, everybody is going to apply to SL. L1 is going to get the seat, right? Then everybody else, everybody is going to apply to the open seat first. L1 is going to get it. L1 is gone. Now, the remaining students, 2 and H, are going to apply for reserved seat. L2 is going to get it. In this way, both low-income students are going to be assigned the school. Alternatively, applicants could first apply for the reserved seats. Right? In this case, L1 is going to get the reserved seat, and open seat is going to go to H. So the choice of the choice rule has distributional implications. Now, both assignments are stable with respect to the corresponding choice rule. Right? We have no problem with stability here. But the problem is stability is not a policy objective in such applications. It is actually, if you look at the, the objective is actually minimizing priority violations. And that is usually not compatible with distributional objectives. If you put distributional objectives on your many-to-one matching problem, and if you have a baseline priority ranking, you are always going to end up with some priority violations. Right? So stability is not a policy objective, but priority violations are. The literature does not. The literature ignores that. They mostly focus on this what so-called precedence order or seed processing order, and they study the effect of different choice rules on how many low-income students are assigned the school, for example. That's the main concern. What we are going to do is actually we are going to go back to the basics. We are going to take an axiomatic approach, following a long tradition, and we are going to characterize the deferred acceptance mechanism with a specific choice rule without even imposing stability. That's what we are going to do. Priority-based assignment. There are many applications, and there are also many applications with diverse and distributional objectives. Some of them are the segregation policies in public schools, affirmative action in college admissions, and so on. For example, in Chicago public schools, the selective schools, Chicago divides neighborhoods into 4 tiers depending on socioeconomic status. And for each tier, each school reserves 17.5% of the seats. In New York, a big chunk of schools actually reserve a big chunk of seats for low-income students. These applications are everywhere. There's, of course, a baseline priority ranking at each school. For example, for the selective schools in Chicago, students take an exam, and their exam scores determine their priority ranking. That is the baseline priority that I am talking about. And the common solution is really a reserves rule. They reserve some seats for the beneficiary groups and modify the priorities at those seats for the beneficiary groups and choose a choice function and apply, find a stable matching with respect to the choice function. Now, our goal is we are going to take an axiomatic approach, and we are going to ask the following question: why reserves rules? We are not even going to start with reserves rules, right? We are going to start with policy requirements. We are going to model them as axioms, and they are going to give us the reserves rules. That's the first thing we are going to do, and this is going to be a big class. A big class, actually. Let me get back to this point. Then the next question is, which reserve rule? Again, we are going to impose further policy requirements, and we are going to show that deferred acceptance mechanism, where all schools use a particular reserve rule, which I'm going to call a regular reserve, is the unique mechanism satisfying our axioms and objectives. That is the goal. We are not the first introducing objectives. There are, in particular, Haffaler. I believe Haffaler is the first one who studied the reserves. We are not the first one who does an axiomatic analysis of a single school choice problem. Actually, Federico and Bumin pioneered this work, studying choice rules from an axiomatic point of view. But we can claim that we are going to be one of the first to study this problem in a general matching framework. And I'm going to give you a characterization of the deferred acceptance algorithm without imposing stability. Now, a bunch of applications with reserves in reserve rules in real life. And let me go back to the literature, and let me start where we see the problem. This is probably, Komners and Sönmez is probably the most general treatment of the problem. Komners and Sönmez assumes seat-specific priorities. A school might have seats for low-income students, high-income students, middle-income students, and each seat might actually each seat, not only type-specific seats, but each seat might have specific priorities. Their objective is finding strategy proof and stable mechanisms. And precedence order is a major contribution of their work. But actually, their precedence order excludes choice rules that I'm going to talk about that minimize priority violations. And we see this as a manifestation of lack of axiomatic approach. And follow-up work by, again, Dur et al. And Padak et al., they also study the impact of precedence order on the distribution, but none of them pay attention to the possibility of baseline priority violations, which is going to be unavoidable when you impose distributional objectives in an otherwise standard many-to-one matching problem. Now, so let me skip this one. What I'm going to do is hopefully I'm going to do two things. I'm going to start with a decentralized school choice problem. That is super common. Charter schools, for example, are entitled to run their own admissions, and in many states, charter schools run their own admissions. In New York City, prior to 2003, application process was centralized, but admissions were decentralized. Each school were admitting its own set of students. So there's we are going to study that decentralized matching problem. This is going to boil down to a single schools problem. And in this single school problem, minimizing priority violations is going to characterize a choice rule, which I'm going to call a regular rule. Okay? And then I'm going to switch to the centralized school choice, where we are going to have many schools, many students, many-to-one matching with distributional constraints. And then minimizing priority violations. Again, I'm not talking about stability. I'm trying to minimize blocking pairs. And eventually, I'm not going to be able to eliminate all of the blocking pairs. But I am going to try to minimize the number of blocking pairs. That's going to yield a deferred acceptance with regular choice rules. Why is this different? This is different because there are other characterizations in the literature, but if you read them carefully, their axioms state the blocking conditions as axioms. And when you eliminate those blocking conditions, you end up with stability. And no surprise if the resulting choice is substitutable, and if you want optimal and everything, you end up with a deferred acceptance with that substitutable choice function. This one, let me introduce some notation. We are going to have a set of applicants. Each set of applicants is going to have a type: low-income student, high-income student, so on. This is the set of type T students in A. Low-income students is going to be A subscript low. And there's going to be a baseline priority over all applicants. And we are also going to have some type-specific reserves. This is the number of seats that a school wants to reserve for low-income students, and number of seats that it wants to reserve for high-income students, and so on. This cannot sum up to a number more than the capacity. We can also have quotas. Quotas turns out to be very easy to handle. Quotas actually bound the number of certain types admitted. I'm going to skip that one in this talk. I'm going to focus on the difficult part, the reserves part. And we are for the decentralized school choice, we are interested in the choice function. A set of students are applying to a school, and the school is going to choose from that set without exceeding its capacity, Q, number of seats. And here are the reserves rules. I'm not going to start with this one. I'm going to arrive to that rule. But let me first clarify what it means. I am going to divide the school into T+1 sub-schools, one for open seats and one for each type. Each type of school is going to have exactly the reserves as number of seats, and the remaining seats are going to go to the open seats. And each reserve school is going to modify the priority ranking by elevating the priority of type T students in the baseline priority. And the open, otherwise, its ranking is going to be consistent with the baseline priority. And the open seats are going to use the baseline priority. Now, here is a piece, one more piece of notation. We are going to consider some application orders. This is an application order for applicant A when the set of applicants is given by capital A. So this application order may depend on the applicant, and it may also depend on who else is applying. What does this mean? This means this is going to tell us in which order of type-specific seats we are going to consider that applicant. Right? In other words, is the applicant going to apply for a low-income seat, or for a high-income seat, or for a open seat first? And what is next? That is the application order. And by dividing this school into T+1 subschools, and by endowing each applicant with an application order, we are turning a single school problem into one matching problem. Right? This is playing the role of preferences. Now I can find a choice outcome. I can apply the deferred acceptance to this problem, where each school has a capacity, each school has a priority ranking, and each student has a preference over those sub-schools. And that's what I'm going to do. I am going to create a choice function associated with an application order by using the standard student proposing deferred acceptance algorithm. Now, examples of this is, again, in the literature, it's examples abound. Now, let me stop a bit here. Let's forget about the reserve rules. Let us go back to the policies. What are the policies? The first one is, what do we mean by reserves? The first axiom goes all the way back to earlier work, which we are going to call reserve respecting. It says the following. This is the number of seats reserved for type T students. If there are not that many type T applicants, select all of them. If there are more than that many type T students, select at least that many type students. This indicates that this actually already says that let's first try to assign as many type T students as possible to those reserved seats. That is our first axiom. That's what we mean by reserving a seat. The second axiom is kind of an efficiency axiom. It's going to be what's called non-wasteful. As long as there are seats, we are going to assign all of the applicants. If the number of applicants is less than the capacity, we are going to assign all of them. Again, I am ignoring the quotas. It's so easy to modify this with quotas. Now, here is my main objective. This is the typical blocking condition in a typical stability notion. I'm going to say that an applicant A is going to violate the priority of applicant A prime if A is chosen. A prime is not chosen, but A prime actually has a higher baseline priority. Right? He's ranked higher, he's not chosen, but another lower ranked one is chosen. We want to eliminate priority violations to the extent possible. When we eliminate all of them, we end up with the standard typical notion of stability. But sometimes we are not going to be able to eliminate all of them. We are going to allow some priority violations, but certain priority violations are not allowed. One of them is, for example, within type priority compatibility. If two students are of the same type, they cannot violate each other's priority. That is the first one. Two low-income students, there's no reason for one of them to eliminate the priority of the other one. That is the condition we are going to impose on our allocation. The second one is we are going to allow some for some priority violations, but we should be able to explain that via our reserves policy. This is the number of type T students who are chosen by this choice rule, but they actually cause a priority violation. That number cannot exceed the number of seats reserved for that type. What does this mean? This means if there are 5 seats available for low-income, 5 seats reserved for low-income students, there might be 5 priority violations by low-income students, probably because they got into those reserved seats. Not because they have high priority, but because these seats are reserved for them. Okay, thank you. So the first theorem is actually these 4 axioms characterize the reserves rules that I gave you. And these reserves rules are, this is a pretty big class of reserves rules. Application order can be student specific. It can actually also depend on the set of applicants. Right? If you go back to Comnas and Sönmez, in their work, application order or precedence order is the same for all students. In this case, it may actually be different for each student, and that's going to be important. Now, let me skip this one. I'm going to call a specific application order regular, and it's this one. Each applicant is going to be considered as seats reserved for his or her type first. If I am a low-income student, I'm going to apply for a low-income, for a seat that is reserved for low-income seats first. Then I can apply to any other, for any other seat. Doesn't matter if it is a high-income or open seat. If you are a high-income student, you are going to apply for a a seat reserved for high-income first. Then you can apply to any one of them. And actually, it doesn't matter. The rest doesn't matter as long as each student applies first to the seat reserved for his or her own type. The rest of the application order does not matter. It always produces the same outcome. Okay. Now, back to the example again. Remember this 2 low-income, 1 high-income one. In this one, the first one, applicants were applying to the open seat first. 2 low-income students are selected. In the second one, each type is applying to the seat reserved for their type first. Here, 1 low, 1 high, right? But no, look at that. In regular, the top ranked 2 students are getting the seats. In the other one, 2 low-income students are getting the seats at the expense of violating each priority. So the regular rule does not create any priority violations in this particular example, but the other one does. This actually turns out to be a general result. Among all choice rules that are satisfying our 4 axioms, the one that minimizes the number of applicants whose priorities are violated is the regular rules. And that one, for example, is not included in Comnas and Typhoon's work and all the follow-up work. Right? Now, yeah.
Confused by the position stated that as long as the application order ranks, you play first. The choices of
It says as long as you apply for your own. Each applicant, as long as each applicant applies for their own type-specific seat first, the rest doesn't matter. So consider two application orders. All types apply for their types first, then for the open seat. Let's consider low, high, and open seat, right? Everybody, I am a low income. I apply for low income seats first, then open seats, then high. Another alternative is I apply for low first, then high, then open. The remaining does not matter.
So the open seat priority.
Yeah. I have to quick. So we actually, there are other alternative ways of modeling priority violations. The regular rules satisfy those 2. But the question is, do we really need alternative rules, right? For example, if you go back to Dur et al., where they talk about the walk zone, policies of Boston, they consider alternative choice rules. Well, here's one theorem. Actually, there's a point there. Given a type T, consider an application order in which type T applicants apply for the open seat first, and all other applicants apply for their own reserved seats first. That is actually the best one for type T students. That selects the biggest number of type T students among all the choice reserve rules we characterized. But do we need that? The next theorem says we don't. Why? Because we can always replicate whatever we obtain here or whatever we obtain with an alternative function by properly setting the reserves and applying the regular rule. What does this mean? This means once we do that, we can actually explain any remaining priority violation via our reserve policies. That is not true with the alternative solutions. And to summarize, regular results can replicate any other reserve rule. And unlike ad hoc rules, any priority violation with regular reserves is fully explained by the policy. Therefore, it actually provides a full transparency in policy design. Now, what I'm going to do next, actually, I am not sure if I have time, but let me first summarize. I'm going to generalize the axioms for assignments. That was for assigned to a single school. I'm going to consider assigning students to multiple schools. Once I do that, I'm going to talk about minimizing priority violations. When I do priority violations in terms of set inclusion, which means a choice rule is going to have less priority violations in terms of set inclusions than another one. Whenever we compare those two choice rules over different problems, one is if there's a priority violation in one of them, that priority violation is going to exist in the other one too. In that sense, it is set inclusion. When we do that, deferred acceptance with regular choice rules is going to minimize priority violations. Again, I'm not talking about stability here, right? There's no stability notion here. But turns out, if you want to minimize priority violations, it is the deferred acceptance with regular choice rules. This is actually the first of its kind, actually, to characterize a deferred acceptance algorithm this way. If we try to minimize priority violations in other ways, for example, let us try to minimize the number of priority violations, that turns out to be a difficult problem to solve, in particular NP hard. And in simulations, we also compare deferred acceptance with the regular choice rules with alternatives, and we obtain significant reduction in priority violations with regular choice rules. So what do I do? Typical matching problem. I'm going to say that an assignment is, let me give at least one of them. An assignment is reserves respecting if for any applicant and any school, as long as there is demand for that school, right, as long as applicant A prefers S to new A, that means he or she is not getting it, then it must be the case that there are not enough reserved seats for that person. That's how we generalize reserve seats policies, right? Non-wastefulness, again, as long as there is enough seats, if there's somebody demanding it, we are going to give that seat to that person. And a priority violation is, again, a typical blocking pair, A prime S. A prime is assigned S with a lower priority, while A prefers S to A. S to his assignment. Now, again, within type, the other axioms, let me actually talk about this. I'm going to say assignment, mu prime, priority violations dominates another assignment. here's how I'm going to define now, how I'm going to think about minimizing priority violations. If the set of priority violation instances, the blocking pairs, let us call the blocking pairs, under mu prime is a subset of the blocking pairs under mu. Right? This one generates a smallest set of blocking pairs. If this holds, I'm going to say mu prime priority dominates mu, and I'm going to try to minimize that set. Not the number of priority violations, but I'm going to try to minimize that set. And when I do that, the outcome of deferred acceptance with regular reserve rules is the priority violations minimal in the class of assignments that satisfy our other axioms. Am I running out of time?
1.5 minutes.
OK, so let me just give you then a major school district. We have the test scores and everything. We divide the population into low achieving and high achieving according to their GPAs. And we reserve seats, 20% of seats for low-income students and 20% of seats for high achieving seats and low achieving seats each. We run the regular rule, regular deferred acceptance, and the deferred acceptance with the alternative rule. The regular one with 20% reserved for each type creates on average 25 blocking pairs. The alternative one actually creates 101, 5 times more blocking pairs. And this is consistent across years. Let me just quickly thank and finish.
Go ahead.
Okay. Can you explain this kind of results if you have overlapping types?
Not really. That would be very challenging because of the complementarity issue. There are things you can do. You can define the overlapping types as a separate type and impose reserves for them. But that would be not so fancy trick, right?
Policy. So not all priority violations. If you're in New York City, send a child a little bit further out in the geographical priority, it's probably less serious from a policymaker viewpoint than, for instance, violating priority for underrepresented minorities. So would that change? Do you have any idea what it is? If you took preferences for policymakers that have this kind of...
My bias answer would be no, we can solve this problem too. And hopefully we can. If we can define geographical, we can define a distribution constraints on geographical distribution. For example, we can define catchment areas for each schools. That might be very important for elementary schools. And we can actually reserve seats for students in the catchment area, and everything would follow right away.
Yeah, but I meant there's a trade-off between priority violations.
I think, let me borrow one more minute. I think the benefit of this approach is there's, of course, a trade-off, but whenever you violate some priorities, you can explain it under these rules. And then it comes to the question of how should we set the reserves? I think that's a more transparent question, a more transparent policy question to have than playing with the precedence orders to favor some of the beneficiaries. Thank you.
Thank you again. Okay, so I think